Hi, this is Coach Shawnee Lavender, the Conscious Moms Coach, and I'm glad you're here with me today. This video is about 3 common communications mistakes that parents commonly make when attempting to persuade or influence or guide their children. So communication that is meant to direct them, give them instruction, tell them what to do, tell them what not to do. So that's what I mean by persuasive communication. Um, so before I get into these mistakes, let me give you a little bit of background. First of all, some of my background. Before becoming a coach and working with families, I was by education and by profession, I was a communications professional. And part of what that meant was I worked extensively with the people that I worked with, which in the first place were physicians, hospital staff, administrators, other clinicians and healthcare providers on communicating effectively with the people they served, oftentimes patients, other providers, other colleagues. And so that was my educational background as a university student, as an undergraduate, and also partially in my master's program as well. And so I spent about 20 years in that field and working a lot with communication. And I did also a lot of my outside recreational hobbies, if you will. I did things like Toastmasters because I love to talk. So, and I love to listen and I love to learn. So I really have spent so long studying communication, and it's one of my favorite subjects because it is something that we all use. We all use it every day, and it's something that has a huge impact on the quality of our relationships, and specifically now with the people that I work with, has a huge impact on the quality of family life. And what I notice is that most parents, not through really direct fault of their own, it's not something they're doing wrong. It's something that as cultures, we tend to not have a lot of knowledge in this area. People don't have good communication skills. They don't know how to communicate in ways that can be easily received by the person on the other end. They don't know how to communicate only certain things and not other messages that they're not really wanting to communicate. They don't know how to receive other people's communication and really fully hear other people. So there's a lot of lacking skills in this area. So it's really common. So if you're a parent that is out there that you find yourself thinking or saying that my child doesn't listen to me, my spouse, my partner doesn't listen to me, I only get really heard when I yell or when I put my foot down. If those are some of the things that are coming up in your life, part of that is likely due to the fact that there are some communication skills you lack. There's other things likely in there as well. However, communication is likely one of the core components. If you find yourself frustrated by your inability to communicate effectively the first time without having to repeat yourself, if you find yourself challenged by how to leave behind some of the communication behaviors that maybe were in your family of origin. Maybe there was a lot of yelling. Maybe there was a lot of blame or scapegoating or sarcasm, some kind of communication, specific communication habits. If you are challenged to leave those behind and you find those coming up when you are, let's say you're really wanting to be a peaceful, intentional, conscious parent, and yet you hear your parent's voice coming out of your mouth, you hear shaming statements coming out. Part of that is at one level because you're lacking certain communication skills. So that's a little bit of the gist behind my experience and how it dovetails into family life and the quality of family life. And as I was saying earlier, part of what led me to think about this video for today was in a conversation with my coach when I was saying, well, I have this idea about doing some work specifically around communication for parents and how to be, really effective, powerful communicators. And I was like, but it doesn't seem like there would be much need for this, even given what I just said, right? So I'm like, I don't see, it's just probably not that big a deal. And she was like, what, are you kidding me? She said, this is, parents have this issue. And she says, you don't, because it's easy for you and it comes naturally to you and you're practiced, you're skilled. And so I was like, oh, okay, I guess you're right. So, so anyway, that's why you need some outside feedback, because we can't always see our own stuff clearly. So that was some of my stuff today. So without further extrapolation or explanation, I want to share with you these 3 mistakes. And I'm normally not focused on mistakes. I'm often focused on what to do instead. However, today I'm going to focus on mistakes because I think it's really valuable to simply see some of the things that you might not be aware of that you're doing that are sabotaging your intentional efforts. So again, this video is really designed for you as a parent. If you are wanting to parent in a very loving, intentional way, if you are doing your best to communicate with your children and with your partner and other people, but we're going to focus specifically on children here. If you are intending to communicate to your children in ways that convey respect, mutual respect, but your respect for them, and openness and trust and honesty. If you're one of those parents, this video is for you. If you are a parent who, in your own childhood, regardless of the quality, if you have identified that there were harmful ways of relating or toxic ways of relating, or simply ways of relating to each other that just didn't feel very good and didn't work for you as a child, and you're wanting to change that inheritance and change the way you do it with your children, then this video is for you. So wanted to clarify that a little bit. That's primarily who I work with, parents on that journey who are, again, seeking to make some course corrections from old habits and earlier ways. So let's talk about these 3 communications mistakes. So the first mistake is communicating at the wrong time or place. Now, before I clarify a little bit, let me remind you that the communication that I'm talking about specifically in this video is communication that is persuasive, influential, directive. And so there are reasons to communicate at certain times and places. And so when you are wanting to basically help your child towards a certain behavior, you're wanting to guide them towards that, persuade them to do that thing, or influence them not to do something, or guide them away from another behavioral choice. If you're wanting to set up some family guidelines about how you're going to be together as a family, what household life is going to look like, that's the kind of communication that this whole video is talking about. So again, it's persuasive communication. So back to that first mistake that parents commonly make: communicating at the wrong time or place. Let me give a few examples of this to make it more concrete. So one example would be hollering at your children from another room. I call this, long distance communication. So you're yelling down the stairs, "Hey, turn off the TV. It's time to start homework." Or you're yelling up the stairs, or, you're doing something like that. That's that long distance communication. That would be communicating really in the wrong place, if you will, physical space. Another example of this would be communicating without connecting first. So again, if you're attempting to persuade your child to do something and you just go right into that, "Here's what you need to do right now." Again, sometimes that can work, and yet overall, that is a communication mistake. That's not a habit that you want to develop, because it's not going to be effective. It is not as powerful to communicate in that way than other ways. So that's another example of communicating at the wrong time or place. The third example of communicating in the wrong time or place is communicating in heated moments. So attempting to do that teaching, that directing, that explaining in a moment where emotions are high. Not the right time, not the right place. So those are examples of the number one communication mistake, or not the number one, the first one I'm listing, communicating at the wrong time or place. So when you are communicating, when your intention to communicate is to persuade with your communication, you want to be very mindful about when and where you do that. Under what conditions are you going to do that? And if you want to know more about that, you can talk to me about what that looks like. But so number one mistake to avoid is communicating at the wrong time or place. The second mistake that parents commonly make is communicating information that interferes with the recipient successfully receiving that communication and being open to then acting on it. So again, if you think about persuasive communication, as the communicator, as the speaker, to make it easy, as the speaker, you're thinking, I want to communicate this message, and what I want to happen is this action. I want this other person to basically agree and say, oh, yes, I will do that, or, oh, I won't do that thing you've said not to do. So that's persuasive communication. You as the speaker communicate a message, and your recipient successfully hears it and then acts on it in the way that you've wanted them to act on it. That's what communication success is. Now, as the speaker, you only have control of your part. You can't make somebody hear you. You can't make them act on it. There's other components there that I work with clients on. However, you can, and you will, whether you know it or not, you, by the way you communicate, will influence them to be receptive to your message. Let me say that again. The choices you make, you will, in one way or the other, you will influence them at a receptivity level. So you don't have control over that, but you're going to do things that either are going to enhance their likelihood of saying, yes, mom, sure, I'll do that. Or no, mom, I won't do that since you've asked me not to do something. Or you're going to communicate things that are going to interfere with their ability to agree with you. So let me give a few examples of some of that communication that interferes with the listener's ability to say yes to what you're asking of them. Blaming and criticism, those are pretty related. So blaming and criticism, and this is very common in parental communication because it's what we learned from our parents and other adults around us. And it's also still the predominant cultural model. So there's that blame, that critical element that comes in, and that really interferes with the listener's ability to say yes. You know why? It's very simple. No one likes to be criticized unless maybe there's a disorder where you love criticism. I don't know what that would be called, but I've never met anyone that's like that. Everyone I've ever met has a defensive reaction, whether you can see it, whether it's overt or not. They have a defensive reaction when they believe they're being criticized. So if blaming or criticism is coming into your communication, it is going to make it much less likely that your child, in this case, is going to be open to hearing you and doing what you're asking. The other example of communication that interferes with the successful reception by the listener is irrelevant info. So that might be, and I see parents do this with each other, and this is a common thing that happens with couples in their communication, is that, let's say you bring up, well, 5 weeks ago this happened, or do you remember this last year? Storing up those nuts, they're like a little squirrel, right? You store up those acorns and then you fling them at your partner. And that's not going to help them be receptive to your message. It might be good data. It might be like, oh, see, here's examples. But nonetheless, that is not going to help them say yes to you. So we do that with our children too. We're giving them information they don't need to be able to have this communication happen. So irrelevant info can interfere. So those are the top 2 mistakes. I'm going to repeat them and then I'll go to the third. Communicating at the wrong time or place to be persuasive. Communicating in a way that interferes with the listener's ability to say yes to what we're attempting to persuade them to do. The third mistake that parents commonly make is they have an overemphasis on persuasive, instructional, guiding, directive communication in their relationship with their children. So this isn't just in the moment. This would be if you were to observe a parent-child interaction or a parent-child relationship throughout the day, you would hear a lot of instruction, guidance, directive. And some of it, this is something that most parents would be pretty surprised and have been when I've had people do this. Like if they do any self-monitoring of communication, the number of times where they are saying things like, don't do, watch out, be careful, pay attention. They're watching their child and they're giving, I think I've got to sneeze here. Excuse me. So they're watching their child and they're giving advice or directive. And it can be subtle, and it's not saying that you can't ever do this. And yet what I am saying is that most parents are not aware that there is a lot of instructive, directive communication that they're giving their children throughout the day. And so when that is a theme within the communication, there is a sense of being talked at as the child. It's like somebody's always telling me what to do, what not to do, giving me input, trying to help me. And you might think, well, don't our children want that? Sometimes, yes. And yet it's really worth looking at, does your communication, is it heavily flavored with a lot of your influence, your eye, your perspective on, well, this is the next step. This is here. This is what I want you to be doing. This is what I don't want you to be doing. So again, for a lot of people, they're not aware of it. They don't realize that this is a big part of their communication with their children. So those, that's basically the types of examples that I'm looking at. So even when your child is doing something, like it might be saying to them, like, let's say they are getting out some art supplies or getting ready to do some art. And you say to them, remember, you need to clean that up afterwards. Or remember, we only use paints outside. Or yesterday you didn't pick up after yourself, so I want to make sure you'll remember to pick up today, okay? Again, I'm not saying you can't ever say those things. It's simply that most parents aren't aware that that kind of communication is very consistent in what they're communicating to their children. So there's lots of other things we can be communicating to our children in our conversations, in our not even conversations, just some of our verbal communication with them and our backs and forths. So that's something to really look out for. Are you overemphasizing persuasion in ways that at some level, it almost, what it does, it somewhat makes your child deaf to your other persuasive communication, because you're not always doing this, but it can be perceived this way by them. You're always telling them what to do, what not to do, being involved with them in ways that have this sense of manipulation, coercion, over-involvement. And so then when you get to a point where you really are wanting them to be very receptive to your guidance, part of them can be like, well, it's just the 27th thing they've said today, so I'm just going to not listen. So let me repeat the three common mistakes, and then for the live version of this, I'm going to check in and see if there are any questions or comments. So the three common communication mistakes that parents make when they are attempting to be persuasive in their communication with their children. Number one, communicating at the wrong time and place to be persuasive. Number two, communicating other information that interferes with their child's ability to receive and act on their guidance, the parent's guidance. And number three, a general overemphasis in persuasive instructional communication throughout the day. So those are the three common, not the three, let me rephrase that. Those are three common communications mistakes that parents make regarding attempting to communicate to persuade their children. So again, normally I emphasize more the solutions or the things to do rather than the things not to do. I thought that this would really be helpful, though, in illuminating some ways that you might not realize that you are potentially contributing to your child not being as receptive to your communication, and therefore making it easier for you to get into experiences with them that are that feel really frustrating. I mean, this is a common thing I hear from a lot of parents. You know, my child doesn't listen. They don't do what I say. They do the opposite of what I say. They only listen when I yell, or they only listen when I threaten to take away something. Or the frustration that parents have when they say, I am so wanting to be a peaceful parent. I so want to leave behind these old habits that, you know, I grew up with. And yet I don't know how to get my children to listen without yelling, or I don't know why I get so angry when, you know, this happens with my child, when I've said something and they don't respond. So it's like, if those things are showing up in your relationship with your children, then I wanted to share these communication mistakes, because it's likely that one or all of them are coming up for you and interfering with your ability to be a powerful communicator. So you can always interact with me here on Facebook, specifically in my Facebook group, the Conscious Moms Circle, and I'll post a link afterwards for those of you who would like to join it or check it out and see if you want to join. You can find me on Facebook, also in on my Facebook page, Shawnee Lavender Coaching. And I also have a number of YouTube videos, which some of you will be watching this through YouTube. So you can subscribe to me there and get my videos there. The other thing that I do is I do individual coaching on a limited basis, and I also do group coaching and group programs. So those are some good things for you to use, because again, what I said at the beginning of this this broadcast was that, to me, the information is valuable, and yet what's most important is that you take the information and you use it. And so to make that change, to make those changes in your family, to be a more peaceful, loving, happy, fun family, a family that's thriving, it requires you to take action. So I wanted to show you some things that you might not be seeing. And if you want to then take the next step and say, well, what now do I do instead? What do I do since I realize I make some of these mistakes? You can book a complimentary session with me and we can find out what are some of the issues you are really struggling with, what is applicable to you and your family. So you can do that. Or again, you can check out some of my group programs specifically around communication issues and how to really move out of the old behaviors that you want to leave behind and into this new way of parenting, these new relationship models that are, as much as many parents want want them, they still feel really foreign. And so it's a matter of learning and implementing and becoming more masterful and practiced, because you just have old habits. There's nothing wrong with you. You have old habits. You lack some awareness. You lack some tools. And if you've got the intention to change, you can change. And I would love to support you in that if this video has resonated with you today. So find me on all those different places: Facebook, YouTube, my own website, ShawneeLavender.com. That is my name, Shawnee Lavender. I'm the Conscious Moms Coach, and it's been my pleasure to be here with you today. Feel free to post questions, and I'll be glad to respond. All right, take care and have really smooth, wonderful communication, whether you're trying to persuade, connect, or something else. Take care. Bye-bye.